In our last clip, we talked about how you can code your data either manually or using a computer's software. But the question now is what you should code and what to code. So you can note the age, the gender, the ethnicity, the race, or any other characteristics that you have for the participants, because later on you can use that when you are describing what the participant said. You can say, so a woman in her 40s said X, Y, and Z. So you can also talk about any facts, arguments, or things that are repeated over and over again in the data. It could be things that confirm what you heard before in another meeting, or maybe you're doing a survey and then you hear the same thing in a focus group or in an interview. So you want to make note of when triangulation is happening and you are getting some kind of data points over and over again. You can put things about that your team had a conversation and you would be interested in exploring X or Y more, or maybe you have some questions that you wanted to ask in advance, and if there's like comments that answer those questions, you can code that. You can also code things that you think are very surprising, things that you never heard, or are even comments that might be outliers, or things that are like very interesting to you, things that you thought were insightful. Um, and it could be, for example, that you read something in a book, or there was like somebody who had this particular theory, and this comment um, sort of like confirms that theory, or maybe it's a worldview. In planning, you will have a lot of comments that are about values, and you can think about what are the political or like social philosophies that are behind a particular comment. So, for example, a lot of people talked about increasing traffic, and that might hurt their children. Their children might have a car accident, or they might be killed. A lot of people talked about estrangers in the neighborhood and how their kids might be kidnapped or something like that. Um, or maybe a lot of people will talk about low income housing and how the property values will go down because of that. And a lot of those are like fears that people have, but there's a lot of interpretation that could be done based on those particular comments. So here's an example of a project on rapid rehousing, and some of the students in city and metropolitan planning work in this project. So we use Atlas TI to be able to analyze the comments, and I give the students in advance some codes, and these codes were divided between like tenants and landlords and service providers, because we have like focus group with all those like three different kinds of participants. And so I developed some codes that the students could use. For example, for the tenants, it was about the experiences being in the shelter, their sense of security, the privacy and personal living space. So I came up with these codes based on looking at the transcripts. I went to all the focus groups, or most, I should say, most of the focus groups. So I wrote down what I thought there could be good codes. I also knew some good codes from the literature and from previous research. Also, sometimes you have like the questions that you ask They had particular themes already, so you might include those codes. So there's again many ways to come up with this. I did not create a code book in where you will have like instructions for people or particular definitions. What I did, it was I verbalized what I was looking for in all of these codes, so we could all have a common understanding before we went on, and when we had to do the coding. But in other projects, I have created more of a definition of what it means. And even if you're alone doing it, it may be a good idea to, when you create a code, to just write a little note. Even this is like very useful, especially if you're using the software, that it has a definition about it, or instructions, so you also remind yourself why you created this code. But that will be most likely of use to you if you are doing more some kind of analysis or interpretive coding, as opposed to more descriptive. Like many of these were more descriptive, so I don't feel that they need that much explanation really. So here's like an example of like how these descriptive codes and analytical or interpretation codes are different. So usually you will read a transcript or a letter, whatever it is, all the way through without making any codes. You might put like comments on the side, or start thinking about which codes you want to use. And then you will do like a actual first round in where you will start putting some of these codes. Like the ones that I have there were very descriptive, like shelter experiences, sense of security, privacy, and personal living space. On the other side, this is after everything was like already coded, and the students like actually like coded out of it. Then I started to think about what were some more like larger ideas that are more about analysis or interpretation. So one of those was like uh, in or security. So insecurity could be either way, being insecure or being secure, before and after being in the shelter. And in this case, it was about receiving a voucher for the rapid housing program, which means that they were renting in the private market after coming to the shelter. The other thing was about, or analysis code, it was about the kids' behavior and the family relationships before and after the shelter. And this very broad concept of like feeling at home. So there could be a lot of quotes or categories that could go inside of this. And this I used to actually write paper. And something I wanted to note here is that there's something called in vivo coding, which is like when you use the words of or a small phrase in order to capture that particular code. So here there's a quote that I use. It's called "I felt safe." So you could use "I felt safe," which is in vivo coding, something that a person is actually saying, and then use "I feel safe, I feel safe, also feel safe" as a code for other people that are saying those things, but you have to do more of the interpretation for them actually saying that. So this was like a major theme of like people who were homeless and came to a shelter, and then they were given a voucher so they could rent in the private market. They felt that they were safe, and this like communicates like the whole theme of the investigation. So here we have like some examples of like what is really talking about insecurity in the emergency shelter. So people felt that they were not really secure where they were staying at the homeless shelter, because there were like drugs, and even if there was um, like officers there, and there was a lot of like sort of like security and policing. There was like a lot of fighting and problems, and people curse each other out, and it was just like a rough place to be. So a lot of people talked about those particular topics, and then when once people were in housing and they had the subsidy, they felt that they could have family over and friends over, so that was like very different from the shelter. That strengthened their relationships. Also the kids um, fought less because they were not fighting with other kids, and the parents could actually trying to put some rules on the kids, and the kids have their own private space to do their homework. So there was like these great changes in the how kids behave, but also in the family and social relationships, and also for couples that now they have their private space, and they didn't before when they were in the road home. So this is like again a conceptual way of like organizing the what was like said in the interview, and basically what you're like, or in the focus group, what you're trying to do is like communicate with somebody else what were like the big topics, and then selecting some quotes that allow you to tell a story.